Okay, we're going to get rolling now. All of our attendees have signed in. Got a mix of marketing and communications folks on the line from both 2-year and 4-year community and technical colleges, and also private colleges on the line here from across the country. So we welcome you. This is the second in our 3-part series about higher value for analytics for higher education. And today we'll be spending about 45 minutes in delivering how to take what we put in place in the first presentation, which was about setting up a measurement plan. Now we're going to get into the trenches a little greater with goals and events, how to get those set up in Google Analytics, and also how to use Google Tag Manager and the benefits to doing that, basically. So we're going one step deeper in a measurement plan and actually tracking on events and goals here. We should have a little bit of time for questions at the end, so you can shoot questions across through the webinar platform, and then we'll address those as they come in. As a reminder, kind of our overall guiding principle behind this entire series is the following statement: if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And that kind of goes in business, it goes in life, really. If you can't measure something, you can't really improve upon it. And that's what we're all here to do, is try to improve our communications efforts through what we're showing on our website, really. So if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. We're going to help you guys hopefully set up goals and events and be able to measure what you're actually doing so you can improve upon it in the future. Just a reminder, we're KW2. We specialize in higher education enrollment-driven campaigns for 4 years, 2 years, community colleges, technical colleges, runs the gamut. We're based out of Madison, Wisconsin, and really, very specifically, we love helping clients with their website initiatives and their digital marketing initiatives. Analytics is just something that's it's a service we provide because it's helping add intelligence to all of the communications efforts. That's the glue that holds all of your marketing communications efforts together. Because ultimately, you're looking for people to get to your website and actually perform some sort of action on the website, right? Calls to action. Overview, myself, I'm Tim Christian. I'm the Vice President of Digital Services here. Allison Trapp will be presenting a little later. She's a Senior User Experience Designer here, as is Claire Lemke. So you'll be hearing from all 3 of us today. And this is the second in our series of 3. So today we're going to look at very specifically goals and events, creating those, the benefits to creating those, and how to do it using Tag Manager. Our final webinar in a series will be in January, setting an ROI, understanding the value of what you're doing and being able to track that in analytics. So hopefully you'll be signed up for that one as well. So let's dive in. Events and goals. So one of the key benefits to setting up events and goals, honestly, is saving you time. How is that going to save you time? Well, I'll tell you how it's going to save time. You open up your analytics dashboard, and you might just see a lot of data, a lot of numbers that are very generic. Google does a great job of having very generic reports ready to go to push out to you once you got your property all set up and you're tracking on things. But how can you make that better? Well, by setting up the events and the goals. Because that's going to give you your specific colleges or your organization's KPIs, things that you think are important for the web performance and what you want users to do on the website, and report specifically on that. So now, when you get the events and the goals set up, you are tracking against what your individual institution actually thinks is important. So then when you open up your dashboard, you can actually start getting some value from that data instead of just looking at a bunch of numbers. Because honestly, what's better? Having 1 million users visit your website but not take one actionable step that you care about, or having 100 people visit your website and all 100 of those click on enroll or click on apply or click to contact you. In that case, 100 is better than 1 million. It doesn't matter what the raw number is. It's that they're doing what you want them to do from an organizational perspective. So it's helping you add value to the numbers that analytics is spitting at you at all times, it seems. So as a quick overview on goals and events, remember, once you want to create a measurement plan first, and that's what we covered a month ago in our first first webinar. But you want to set up your goals, and those are more the higher institutional level, organizational level, college or school level goals. Those are your big macro conversions on your website. Events are actually clickable events, little things that users would do on your website that could eventually lead to a goal. So think of events as the little KPIs throughout a website visit that ultimately lead to, let's call it a big click on the website. And that's the click to enroll, click to apply, click to contact, something like that. So there's our kind of reminding us of the definition of how we're talking about goals and events. And then putting a little finer point to it, goals, according to Google now, so this is Google, they allow you 20 per your reporting view. So you get up to 20 goals. And these can be a number of different things. So a destination goal, for instance, is like when a user lands on a specific page, or they get to a thank you page after they fill out a form. That's a destination goal. Duration goals are exactly what they sound like, amount of time on site or views over a certain number of pages. And then goals can actually be set up based on events as well. Allison's going to talk a little further about that a little later, because that can get a bit confusing because we're starting to interchange terms, but goals can actually be set up based on events. Events, now we're getting into actual clickable, trackable things that users would actually perform on your website. And these aren't things that Google necessarily tracks by default. So clicking on specific links, clicking video play, how far down someone scrolls on the page can be set up as an event, form submissions, all those KPIs that you've identified are important in your measurement plan are what you'll want to set up as events in analytics. Now, both events and goals can lead you to insights quicker, because it's just adding an extra layer of data that'll help you assess if the users are doing what you want them to do from your organization's perspective. It's easier, it'll lead you to insights quicker if you set these up. And it starts to begin to form for a basis for return on investment. And that's where we're leading with this one, with our next webinar, where at the end of the day, really, you want to be able to report back to your folks, hey, we invested in this communication effort. It led this many people to the website. They clicked on the buttons we wanted them to X% of the time. That's ultimately what you're trying to do here, is begin to make the case for what worked, what didn't, what you should add fuel to, and what you should just remove off of the communication side, you know? So you're ultimately trying to lead to that day where you can be reporting on this in a very organic fashion on what's working and what's not. As a reminder, I'm going to go backwards in time a little bit. So in our first webinar, I'll quickly review this for those that didn't attend the first one. We had two different case studies. We had kind of mock case measurement plans that we had talked about at that time. And our first one was about a 4-year College of Engineering. In this case, it's University of Wisconsin-Madison. And one of the major organizational goals was to increase the awareness of their world-changing research. And so we're going to track on these now throughout our time ahead, where we actually take this and we show you how to set up events and goals in analytics that would meet that actual website goal. So I want to review what we had talked about in the first webinar. So as a reminder, the blue up top was the organizational goal. That's about increasing awareness of the research. That red layer, that is how we translated that organizational goal into a website goal. And there's 3 different goals across that. And when you get to the gold layer, you're actually into what we would call KPIs. And I'm sure you guys call them KPIs as well. So now we're getting into actual tactical clickable events on the website. So that's the gold layer, that's events. And then at the bottom in the teal and the blue color, those are the audiences that we hope to communicate to through that web content and tracking that. Then our other case study was a 2-year. So this is an associate's degree. So this is Blackhawk Technical College out of Janesville, Wisconsin. A reminder on this one was we were looking to increase applications for associate degree programs. And then that translated into a measurement plan We have the goal up top, then we have the three in red, we have the website goals, how we translated that into website goals. Then we put it into our tactics in gold. Okay, so that's how we've got the event goals and destination goals there, all of it leading to eventually prospective students. Okay, so that's a reminder of what we had talked about last time and a quick overview as to how you would set up a measurement plan before you go in to put anything into events or goals and analytics. Have some document, some working approved document approved by higher ups, hopefully, that where you get everybody who agree that can agree to this is what we hope the website is doing. When users come to our site, we want them to do X, Y, and Z. Write it down, get it approved, then put those things in place in analytics. It'll make your life a lot more sane to just make sure everyone's on the same page as to what you think a successful visit to the website is. So, all right, so that's a look at events and goals as it pertains to our two different case studies. Claire is going to now walk you through very specifically how to set this up in analytics. So this is Claire Lemke.
All right, awesome. So in this section, I am going to cover all the elements that you'll need to include in an event and why each of those elements is important. I'll also cover a guide to thinking about your events and how to structure them. And we have a tip for keeping them all straight because that's very important. And then I'll give a quick overview of how Tag Manager works from high level before Allison walks us through the setup. So first, let's talk about what goes into each event. There are 4 different components for each. So there's the category, the action, the label, and event value. Each of the 4 elements that are here is really important to think about before you start setting up any of your events at all. So keeping consistent and well thought out is going to be really important for helping you organize your data. If you plan well, you'll have really a lot better reports to look at later. So if you don't plan these things out, the data can be kind of a mess. We've seen this before where, sometimes there's a category in one spot is an action in another place, and you're having to, months or years from now, go through and manually add things together. And we really want to help you avoid that. And planning this out in advance is going to help you see how things are looking on your website from a high level. So categories help you group similar topic areas or concepts together, as do actions. So you can see how events on your site are doing by, for example, a business category or the type of content like videos altogether or articles, or by the area of your site or by the action that the user takes. So that could be something like all of the clicks that happen on your site or all of the video plays. Next are event labels. Labels help you identify where something took place. And that could be high level, such as your website's header or footer. It could also be a content section. And then the event value is an optional field. You can set up events without a value, so it's an optional thing to put in there. For right now, if you are going to set up goals and events right after this webinar, you might want to wait until after our part 3 webinar about setting values and calculating ROI. But we do highly recommend taking that step as soon as you feel ready to do so. It can help you determine the true ROI or ROAS. ROAS is return on ad spend of your marketing and content creation efforts. And it's one of the high level metrics that basically all stakeholders can really care about and get behind. Before I move on, I just mentioned ROI versus ROAS. ROI is your return on investment. And generally that, when stakeholders or leadership talks about that, they're talking about all of the efforts that go into that calculation. So they're talking about, maybe anything from the staff time and effort to the actual hard costs of something, where ROAS is really, we're just looking at the ad spend and the return on that. It's important to think about ROAS because it's a metric that different advertising platforms like Google's paid search or even Facebook ads can use to optimize for ROAS. So we'll get more familiar with that term in the part 3 webinar that's coming up in January. But I just wanted to introduce those terms because we kind of go back and forth between the two of them. Okay, so back into events, labeling and setup and things like that. How can you tell what a category, label, and action should be? And I do want to emphasize that really event naming and categorization is entirely up to you. There's no right way to do it. And so we don't have, kind of a checklist for making sure that it's consistent every time. But the thing that matters at the end of the day is that you understand how things are grouped, why they're grouped that way, why they're categorized that way, so that when you and your stakeholders have a question, you can answer it. And by that, I mean, if someone comes and says, hey, how many people play our videos? Or does anybody actually click on that third tab? People go to our FAQs page, and we can see that in Google Analytics right out of the box, but do they actually open up the answers? And events tracking in Google can really help us see the answers to those questions. So looking at the two sentences that are up here on this slide, they help us organize our thoughts into these types of labels. So if we want to know how many people use the social icons in the site footer, for example, we might say something like this first sentence here. David clicked on the social media icon in our site footer to get to our Facebook page. So in your event setup, the category would be social media. The action would always be click, and the location or the label where the action took place would be the footer. For the social media category, you could also have share as an action, for an example. And so in the future, you'd be able to look at everything within that social media category, and then you can compare, how many people are clicking on it to go out versus using a social icon to share some content. In the second example, we care about how many people are using the videos to learn more about us or about something on our site. So the sentence here is, Sally played a video about undergraduate research opportunities. Here the category is undergraduate research, and for that you could have a whole lot of different things related to that for that label, like the tabs or videos or emailing somebody for more information, anything like that relates to that high-level category of content of undergrad research. So next we'll walk through our concrete example from the College of Engineering, which we touched on before, and then we'll look at Black Hawk Technical College as well, just to show you some of those in the works. So categories are used to compare interactions against each other. You can create categories, like I said, any way that makes sense for you and for your organization, but it's really important, and we'll say this over and over again today because it truly is very important to keep them consistent. So always use, for example, articles with an S versus sometimes it's articles and sometimes it's article. And that is going to be a real lifesaver in the future when you're trying to look at your data. So categories can be a business grouping, like graduate degrees, or here the example is research. Or like in that second sentence that we looked at before, it can be a similar content grouping, such as articles, videos, or events. And meaning on-campus events, not Google Analytics events. So in this example for UW College of Engineering, what we really care about is what's happening with anything that's related to research. So research is going to be our category. An action is generally exactly what it sounds like. So it's what did the user do that we want to track? So did they click on something? Did they play something? Here, an example is, we talked in the first webinar about our goal being to send people out to on-campus and off-campus partners. And so here we're tracking exits to another research partner. So you can put exit to as that action. And then labels give you a lot more context as to what actually happened within that event. So they give you more information on the events, such as the name of the file that's downloaded or the name of the person that someone emailed, for example. The name can also be something like the page name, and we'll show you how to make that happen without having to create one event for every single page on your website, because that could get super messy. So in the example of research, we can track the name of the external resource that someone clicked on as the label. And with those double brackets around there, we'll get into how that's done dynamically and why that's formatted that way. So just keep that in your back pocket because we'll talk about that in just a moment. So putting it all together, we have the categories research, the action is exits to, and the label is Granger Institute for Engineering, which is one of the on-campus partners. So next up, just for another example, is from Blackhawk Technical College. So they care, once again, about how people are using their video content, which is something that, when we talk about ROI, they spent a lot of time and resources, some internal and some external, to develop those videos. And so they really care before they invest more of that time or out-of-pocket costs into developing that content. They want to know, does that lead somebody to be a potential student or to eventually enroll? So instead of being undergraduate or admissions, in this case, the category that we're going to use will be videos. So this will allow us to see all the interactions that occur related to your videos across the site. And ultimately, it's going to help Blackhawk Technical College quickly look up all of their ROI on videos. And really, at the end of the day, that's most of the reason for setting up all this tracking in the first place. We want to track the interactions with the video. So our action is going to be play in this instance. And then finally, we're going to organize their video plays by which video they played. So they can see all of them in one place in the data, but then they can also see which video is performing best, or they can find low performers if that is the case. And that information is going to help them make decisions in the future. So wrapping all of that together, we see that the category is videos, the action once again is play, and then finally we had used before that kind of dynamic label in those double brackets, and so the video title is going to be Administrative Professional Program. All right, so I'm going to pause here and just stress the importance of planning events ahead of time. So I've said it before that keeping your category and action name straight is so important to make sure that you have something that you can filter on in the future. You don't want to set all those things up. It does take some time, not a ton of time. Allison will show us that you can do it internally and without developer help, but it does take time. What you don't want to do is find out later that you're going to have to manually add these things together or that you've lost some of your data. So in our previous webinar, we created a measurement plan, which was one of the keys to making sure you know what all of your events and goals should be tracking and measuring. And then once we have an approved measurement plan, we generally make a spreadsheet to keep everything straight. You can use, a spreadsheet, Google Sheets, a notepad. Sometimes I'll use if I don't have very many to set up. But whatever it is, it's going to help you make sure that you don't miss any events or goals or misspell anything, or that you're really making sure that your naming is consistent. So we have an example here for Blackhawk Technical College. So again, we've got our categories in one column, we've got our actions in another, our labels, and then our values, which Allison will talk about in a moment too. So yeah, that's just a reminder to, not only plan ahead, but also give yourself some sort of way to track what you've set up so far. So now that we've gone through kind of the anatomy of an event, let's go through a brief overview of Google Tag Manager. And that's the tool that Allison is going to show us how to use. There are two key components to Tag Manager. The first one is a trigger, or the action that has caused the tag to fire. And then the second one is going to be the tag, which is a piece of code that records data about that trigger's action. The third major section of Tag Manager is variables, and those brackets are starting to look familiar, so that's where those come from. The variables aren't required, but they can be really useful for getting additional information about your tags. A trigger is really any action on your site that causes one of those tags to fire. And we just talked about what some of those things might be. They could be clicks or video plays. Scrolling to a certain point on the page can be really useful to get a deeper insight into what people are reading. You could do form submissions, actually viewing a page, or custom events too. The next key component is going to be the tag itself. And the tag is that piece of code that records information and then passes that information into either Google Analytics or another platform. So you can use those tags to get information out of your website and into analytics, for example, or social media posts. So, when you post an article or something from your site, and then you can preview that image off of your site, that's an example of that. Google Ads or Google Optimize, other advertising platforms, and a lot more uses for those. So the last part is going to be a variable. And a variable is a placeholder for any value that's going to change, like a video name or the text that somebody clicked on. And rather than going through by hand and hard coding all those names in, which can get really messy and just rife with error and things like that, very time consuming, you can have those variables dynamically added in. So that's super useful. Variables can also be constants. So your Google Analytics ID is an example of that. And then we'll be looking at more specific examples in the coming slides with Allison. So now that we've talked about all those pieces and parts of what makes up an event, how to label it, how to keep them organized, Allison is going to put all of that information together in a really concrete way and show us how to actually set these up.
All right. Thank you, Claire. So now we're actually going to get into Tag Manager. So we've seen the basics of Tag Manager and what is included, and we are going to show you how to actually get it set up on your site. So before we can actually start setting up tags, the first step is to connect Tag Manager to your website. First, you're going to go to the actual Tag Manager site. And just like you did when you created your Google Analytics account, you're going to create a new account for your site and get it all hooked up. Next, and this is really the only time you're going to need help from a developer or your IT team, you're going to get your container code installed on your website. And so this is just a little piece of code that's going to go on every page of your website in the header and just before the body tab. While they're in there, you should have them remove any legacy code. So you might already have Google Analytics code on your website. You want to get that removed so that we're not doing any sort of double tracking. So this is really the only step you'll need help from IT. And from here on out, once this is installed, you can do everything else yourself. So the final step, and the step we're going to show you an example of here first, is to connect Google Tag Manager to your Google Analytics account. So you're going to create your very first tag, which is going to be a page view tag, and we'll show you a little video of that. After today's webinar, we are going to share this presentation with you. So you'll have all the videos and you can rewatch these as needed. I know they're going to go a little bit quickly. All right, so we're going to show you here how to create a page view tag. Sorry, have a little bit of video play issue. There we go. All right. So this is the Google Tag Manager dashboard, and over on the left, you're going to see all of those components that Claire just walked you through. So your tags, your triggers, your variables. And the first thing we're going to do is create a tag. And this is a little bit different process than the other events we're going to set up. But first, for this one, we're going to create that page view tag. So you'll hit tags and then new. And you can name these anything you'd like. So the important thing, like Claire said, is that you understand what this does. And there are a lot of different options for tags, but here in this webinar today, we're just going to choose Universal Analytics. You can see it's a very long list and there's a lot of different options. Today we're focusing on analytics. It's going to default to page view, which is exactly what we want to do here. And in order to get it to track to your Google Analytics account, we're going to need to create a new Google Analytics settings variable. So these are those variables that Claire went over. Again, you can name it anything you'd like as long as you know what it means. Here I'm just going to call it GA settings. And then you're going to enter your tracking ID. And this is going to be a long string of numbers that starts with UA. And you can find out what your ID is by going to the administrative settings of your Google Analytics account, and you'll see your ID right in there. Once you're done, you're going to hit save. Oops, I'm sorry. Before you hit save, you're going to add a trigger. This is very important, and you don't want to forget that. And right now, I just have one option for triggers, and that's all pages. And that all pages is default and in Google Analytics or in Google Tag Manager right from the start. So that's why I didn't set up a trigger first for this event. Now we're going to submit. Anytime we create changes, we're going to want to submit those changes. So you add a descriptive version name. And again, anything you'd like. This is really helpful if you're going back or if you need to revert back. You can revert back to your previous version. And then you hit submit and your changes are live. So that's really everything you need to do to connect Google Analytics to your Google Tag Manager account. And now you have all the same basic tracking that you would have through Google Analytics. So page views, time on site, all of those metrics are captured with just that one tag. It can seem a little overwhelming at first, and we'll go through some more examples, but it really can be completed in under 5 minutes with very little help. So our next step is going to be to actually set up events in Tag Manager. So what we're going to do here is actually look at some questions that we can answer on the site. So I'm going to take our Blackhawk example and use those program pages to answer some questions. So for example, as Claire mentioned, Blackhawk has invested a lot of time and budget into these videos, and they want to make sure they're getting a return from those. So we're going to find out if students are actually watching that program video. So we are back in Tag Manager here. And the first thing I'm going to do this time is create a trigger. And the reason I'm doing that is because every event needs a trigger to fire. So again, I'm naming it whatever I feel like. And I have a lot of different options for triggers, and I'm going to choose YouTube video here. Tag Manager also allows you to do Vimeo video, but it only tracks YouTube by default, so you have to set up a custom event if you use Vimeo for your school. Here I'm tracking both starts and completes, and I only really care about some videos. It's going to default to all, but I only want to track videos on those program pages. So I'm going to use a filter so that I'm only tracking video plays on one of those program detail pages. So I'm going to save my trigger, and now I'm going to create the corresponding tag. So I like to name these the same thing. It does help to kind of match them up, but again, you can name it anything you'd like. And we're going to go in and set up another Google Analytics tag. This time, instead of using page view, we're going to select event. And then here you can see the category, action, label, and value that Claire went over in the event structure. Here I'm going to use videos and play. And then I'm actually going to set up a variable so I can get that video title. So instead of having to do a different event for every single video, now I'm automatically filling in the video title. Here you can see I'm entering some representative values, and that is something we're going to cover in our next webinar. Highly recommend that you do that, and you'll see why when I set up goals in a few minutes, but it really does give you a lot more data and detail about how things are performing. Every single time you set up an event, you do need to connect it to your Google Analytics account, so that's why that variable helps there. You don't have to type that long UA code every single time you create an event. So just like the last time, I'm going to connect it to a trigger, and this is definitely an important step. It will not fire without this trigger. I'm going to use the trigger I set up in step 1, and now we can tell whether or not users are actually watching those videos on the program pages. And so that's going to apply to all of those program pages across the board, and we're going to be able to track all of those videos, again, with just that one tag. So our next question is to measure scroll depth. And Blackhawk, on their program pages, they have a career pathway. And this is really important content for them. They want to make sure that folks see that before they apply. And it's all the way down at the bottom of the page. And with Google Analytics basic tracking in place, we do know people are viewing this page, but we're not sure whether or not they're actually making it all the way to the bottom. So this would actually have actionable intelligence. If they find that most people aren't actually making it to the bottom of this page, they might want to change the location of where this content is located. So to do that, we're going to actually set up a scroll depth event. So again, we're going to start with our trigger first. I always just like to start with it first so I don't forget it. And we're going to name it scroll to bottom. And we're going to choose again from our list, and you can see scroll depth is right there above the YouTube video. And here we're going to choose vertical scroll depth. And the reason is we're tracking vertical scrolling down the page. I'm going to enter 80%, not 100. 100% includes your footer, and 80% is about where that headline falls. You don't want to go as far as to 100 because odds are not everybody's going to scroll down past your footer, especially if you have a larger footer. So I like to keep it around 80 or 90 if I'm targeting the bottom of the page. I'm again going to limit this to just those pages, those program pages, because that's what I care about for this particular event. And now I'm going to create the tag. And the process for creating the tags is actually pretty similar from tag to tag. You can see I'm naming it the same again. I'm going to choose Google Analytics again. And then I'm going to set up that category, action, label, and value. And here you can see for the label, I am using a variable again. I love using variables because they really do give you a lot of detail. And we're going to use the page URL so we know which programs they're scrolling all the way to the bottom on. And again, I'll connect it up to my trigger and hit save. And now we know if people are scrolling all the way down to the bottom of the program pages. And this is really helpful because now I can track that holistically, so I can see, okay, compared to the page views of the program pages as a whole, only 30% of people are making it to the bottom. Or potentially identify a problem program. So there's some programs where people don't make it all the way to the bottom, and see if it's because of some of the content on the page or something else that we can change. So you can really get something actionable out of these events. Our final question, and this is really the biggie, is are prospects applying to the program from that program page? And this is something that I suspect, like many of you, Blackhawk uses an external CRM for their application forms. So they're not actually hosted on the Blackhawk site. So right now, all they know from analytics without an event set up is that somebody goes to that program page, checks out the program, and then they exit. And they don't know if they exit because they're going to apply, which would be great, or if they're just exiting. So that's not good, and that's something that we can definitely rectify with events. So we're going to fix that. So this is an on-click event or click event. And I suspect that this is probably going to be the bulk of the events you would want to set up in analytics. Most of the things that we're tracking are clickable. And you can see that under click, there are actually two choices for clicks. There's all elements or just links. And the reason for this is because you can get more or less specific. I'm going to go broad here and say all elements, mostly because that button is partially an image, so I want to make sure that the code is interpreting it as a link. If one doesn't work, try the other. Here again, I'm going to limit it. So I'm going to limit it to the program pages because I want to know if people are applying from the program pages. And there's two different ways they can do that. There's an apply button up in the header and one on the sidebar of the page. And then I'm also going to say I only care about clicks to the actual URL for the application. So there might be other clicks on those pages, and that's not what we're tracking here. We're just tracking that application link. So just like the other times, we're going to create the corresponding tag and enter in our category, action, label, and value. And here, pay special attention to the category and action that I'm adding in. I'm doing programs and apply. That'll come into play when we set up an event goal based on this event later. So lastly, I'm going to hook it up to that trigger, and you can see that programs apply and save it. So now that I have those 3 events live, I do want to remind you that you do have to submit to publish every single time you have a set of events you want to publish. We're not going to show that again here, but it is something to keep in mind because sometimes you'll set up events and then not publish, and then they won't actually be firing. So that's kind of a brief overview of how to create tags, 3 different types of tags in Tag Manager. And obviously there are other types of tags you can create, but those cover a lot of different scenarios we see pretty frequently with our education clients. And now we want to see, now that we've done that, what we can actually do with that data. So what we're going to do here is set up a goal based on events. So goals, as Tim mentioned, are really measuring how your site fulfills those larger objectives. And the lines can get a little bit blurred, as we've already seen. So goals or events can track any site activity, whereas goals really want to be limited to those bigger macro conversions. And they can be based on events, but really you're not looking to measure every single thing on your site as a goal. That's what events are for. Events can be used to set up goals, as I've mentioned. And goals really make it easy to see ROI because goals are available in analytics on every single report. So you can always look at your different goals against your inbound marketing channels, against different audience segments, and see what's performing best on your site. So our event goal for Blackhawk we're going to set up here is that application goal. So before, we couldn't actually tell if people were just leaving the site or if they were applying. And now we have an event in place that is tracking that. But just because it's set up as an event, it's not yet a goal. So we want to make sure that we have that connected up in Google Analytics. So before I get into this, we're actually switching out of Tag Manager. The last 4 videos were all in Tag Manager. This one is actually going to be back in Google Analytics. So while you can set up all the different events in Tag Manager, you do have to set up goals in the administrative section of your Google Analytics account. So here I'm in the admin section of the Analytics account, and you can see under the view setting there is goals. So I'm going to click that, and then I'm going to click new goal. And I'm going to choose custom. They do have templates available, but they're pretty easy to set up from scratch. And I'm going to name the goal, and you can name this again anything you'd like. They have goal slots, and you can keep the one that they've set for you, or if you want to measure goals as a set, you can choose a different goal slot to group goals together and track them as a set. I did say to pay attention to the category and action, and that's because we're going to fill those in here. So we're going to enter the category of programs and the action of apply. I'm not going to enter a label. The reason for that is because the label for all of those events will be different, and I want to track them holistically. Value is also really important. Since I set up a value when I was setting up the event, I'm going to use that for the goal here. But if you set up a different kind of goal, you need to enter a value at this step. You're always going to click verify this goal, and that's going to tell you how your goal performed over the last 7 days and basically let you know that it's set up correctly. So that's the steps for creating a goal. I know that was pretty fast, but it's essentially linking it up to that event that you created and then making sure that you have a value in place, and that'll be set moving forward. And you'll see data in the next 24 hours for those goals appearing. Alrighty, so we've touched on it a few different times during this presentation, but the final step in this process, and I think what really makes all of this setup worthwhile, is getting those values nailed down, understanding how much those intangible actions on your website are worth. In some cases, you might know if somebody applies, they have a 20% chance of being accepted and a 10% chance of actually accepting. So you can actually calculate the value of that prospective student based on those application and admission odds. In other cases, you might need to do a slightly less tangible value. So we'll cover that in our next webinar, really how to set those values and then how to use those to determine your ROI or ROAS.
So 12:55, I've given you 5 minutes left for you to get some coffee before your next meeting. Hope you guys all enjoyed the conversation and the topics we covered today. Thanks for your time. We greatly appreciate it. And from Madison, Wisconsin, we say have an awesome day. Thank you.
Thank you.